Wednesday night, we got the full release of the 2024 ACC schedule. We had gotten a little drip at the beginning of the week on Monday, and then we came out with week 1. Then it was the Thursday, Friday games. Well, now we've got the whole slate. And Bud, you already did a Nolecast. So how about that? What you don't have to go totally Florida State, but I'll at least let you take lead on this. What were some of your takeaways from seeing the full ACC schedule laid out, at least in terms of home road splits, the rhythms of a season, and sort of how it goes from there?
So I think NC State and Miami have the two really favorable schedules this year. Louisville has a less favorable schedule, I believe, among the teams that I think have a legitimate shot to win the league, right? Which in my mind is sort of like Clemson, Florida State, Miami in some order, which I'm not really sure on as of January. And then NC State, Louisville, SMU, and maybe the Hokies. If we get complete chaos, I can't totally rule out some of those teams potentially taking it down. So I thought Miami and NC State had the easiest overall schedule. I think Miami misses Clemson and they get FSU at home, and they also miss another one of those other teams. They did a nice job of scheduling your two biggest games of the year, which in my opinion, and I might be biased on this, so I'll admit the bias here, Florida State, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, are both on weekends in which I think they have a pretty good shot of being like the national game. So if you look at this is I believe it's week 6 for Florida State, Clemson.
In Tallahassee.
Correct. Yeah. So the other big games against which you would compete, Michigan, Washington, which probably know, Iowa, Ohio State, Michigan State, Oregon, UCLA, Penn State, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Bama, Vandy, Missouri, A&M, Tennessee, Arkansas. There's like nothing there. If both these teams are 0 or 1 loss in the loss column by the time they meet, that's probably going to be the national game, Florida State, Clemson. And then you go to week 9. Again, if you're the ACC, I got to give you some applause here. You might get Florida State, Miami in like big time ABC primetime, because your games that week, Notre Dame, Navy, which I'm assuming will be an NBC game. Michigan State, Michigan. Like Michigan State, Michigan, probably no. Nebraska, Ohio State certainly could be. Illinois, Oregon. We're going to get Tom's thoughts on Illinois to determine the viability of that matchup. Now, Oklahoma at Ole Miss could be one. LSU, A&M, certainly if A&M surprises, could be one. But like, there's no big Georgia game that week. It's Missouri, Bama. So I think if you're the ACC, you may get your two biggest games and have put them in really comparatively weak national competition slates to where you really get them both on like primetime ABC.
I also think the part of that too is it's very likely to be like the ABC primetime game, because you mentioned those Big Ten games. Those aren't ABC games anymore.
Right. Exactly.
If that Ohio State Nebraska game is big, that'll be big noon Sunday or Saturday. Sorry. Or it could be the CBS afternoon game, or it'll be the Peacock game on primetime. So no, I do think there's a very good chance those games will be ABC primetime, unless, we got Ole Miss, Kentucky or something. SEC, ESPN, got to put them everywhere now.
And we don't have we don't have the Big 12 schedule yet, but I have a hard time thinking that if those teams live up to the bargain, that there will be a Big 12 game that you'd put over those.
Mm-hmm. So I understand that there's not like one spot on the calendar that's always dialed in for it, but Clemson and Florida State. So this year they play late September, mid-October, 1, 2, 3 times in the last couple of years, a couple more late Septembers, but they've also played in mid to late November as well. I think for the Clemson Tigers, the fact that you've got Georgia, NC State, and Florida State as 3 of your first 5 opponents is going to set the tone for how things go coming down the stretch. Because after that, Wake, Virginia, Louisville, but at home, at Virginia Tech, at Pitt, then Citadel, South Carolina. Clemson wants to be competing for an ACC championship once again. It is going to be a challenge to be able to, start the season hot, no warm up, and then be ready to play some of your best football against some of the best opponents all there in the first 5 games of the season. So, in terms of the draw, maybe having those spaced out a little bit, the Wolfpack and the Seminoles might have been a little more helpful. The other side of it is if you can get through there, picking up a couple wins, then all of a sudden you should be well on your way with some key head-to-head tiebreakers as well for that divisionless ACC championship race.
I will also note this year we really liked Louisville, mostly because of the schedule. This year, it's not so much the teams which they play or don't play, but there is some of that. It's this middle stretch. So Georgia Tech at Notre Dame, which is not a league game, but anyway, host SMU, at UVA, host Miami. Then you got to turn around at Boston College on a short week, and then turn around at Clemson.
Much more difficult.
That's a 7-game no-bye stretch, which, by the way, everybody gets 2 byes this year unless you play on week 0, in which case you get 3 byes. Because we have a 5 Saturday September and a 5 Saturday November. So
yeah,
we get this about, once every 8-9 years?
I can't remember who is. I think it's Georgia Tech because they play that week 0 game. They've got like a thing where they've got like a bye, then they play a game, and then they have another bye immediately after it. So there's like a game and an island. I will say, going back to what you talk about, like with Louisville, that was the one thing I was looking for in the schedule, as far as maybe teams that you're not thinking of as great teams who might benefit from missing teams and sneak into the ACC title game. North Carolina loses Drake May, but it avoids Miami, Clemson, and Notre Dame. Again, that's not a conference game, but still. Syracuse avoids Florida State, Clemson, and Notre Dame. Also has a non-con of Ohio, Holy Cross, UNLV, and UConn. So Syracuse might be decent this year. NC State's only getting Clemson. They don't have Miami or Florida State. And then SMU also avoids Clemson and Miami. So just some things to keep an eye on.
Be very Danny, any other takeaways from the ACC schedule?
No. You guys covered it. I don't know. I was going to have some snarky comment about why don't we get the same treatment that the SEC got on their schedule. And then
they tried.
Yeah, they tried. But I'm looking at the non-conference games as the biggest matchups, that are exciting, not, who's new. Like the newcomers, Florida State has to go to SMU and play them. And it's weird to see Cal on their schedule, and you see Stanford littered throughout here. But they're not when you look at Oklahoma, Texas, or when you look at the new Big Ten, you're like, wow, I cannot wait for that matchup. So I get it. I get why they're not there. I did think Miami, it's good to see them back playing Florida again, week 1. I thought their stretch was interesting. Yeah, I think you guys hit it all.
So Louisville, go ahead.
Nobody plays Clemson, Florida State, and Miami. And I don't think anybody...
Which is probably a good thing, right? If you want the perception of the league, winning, bowl eligible, 8-win, whatever it is, teams, that's a good thing.
And nobody misses all 3. I don't believe.
They were voting on conference expansion, and they're like, so if we add more teams, we are less likely to play Florida State, Miami, and Clemson.
Right.
Deal. The Louisville Cardinals, by the way, at Clemson on November 2nd. Then they have a week off. Then they're out in Palo Alto on the 16th of November. Fast turnaround to have to play Pitt at home. That's not fun. I'll be looking for teams after the West Coast trip if they don't have the off week after the West Coast trip, seeing what we got in terms of any kind of trends with this new. And this could apply, by the way, to any of these other cross-country trips that we've got coming up. Will be something to keep an eye on when we get into locks season.
One more thing. I do believe that they intentionally scheduled to minimize the chance of conference championship game rematch, at least with a short turnaround. So if you look at this, of the teams we think can probably win the league, NC State's final 2 games are Georgia Tech, UNC. Right. If NC State's playing for the league, those teams are not, most likely, right? The Hokies, the last 2 games, Duke, UVA. So again, very little chance of a rematch there. Miami, Georgia Tech, Duke, Georgia Tech, open date, Wake, Cuse. So almost no chance of a rematch if Miami is a team playing for the conference title there. Louisville, Cuse, Pitt, open date. So again, FSU actually doesn't play a league game after November 2nd. They go Notre Dame, open date, Charleston Southern, Gators. And then Clemson is... There's some chance, Clemson, Virginia Tech on the November 9th, but then it's Pitt and Colgate, and then you know, the
South
game
Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think there's some intentionality of like, hey, we don't want to play like the same game twice in 3 weeks.
Yep. Probably smart.
Also, another thing I noticed too, because like there's always like the dark horse talk. This team's going to surprise people. And I've seen a lot of Virginia Tech hype for the way that they finished the season and how much they have coming back. Then I saw their schedule. And it's like, it's not overloaded. It's just the way that it's put together. Like, first of all, you do have two Power 5 or Power 4 opponents. Sorry, I learned that in your non-con with at Vandy and Rutgers, but they're Vandy and Rutgers. But you open ACC play on a Friday night at Miami. Then you're traveling all the way across the country without a bye in between to play Stanford. You're at Syracuse. And the next week you get Clemson at home, but it's after 4 straight games between buys. It's like, I think I'd probably start selling my Virginia Tech and get to the ACC Championship game stock if I'm holding it.
Very interesting test for Brent Pry and the Hokies as they take on some expectations heading into 2024.